Read through them?
Yeah.
Okay, so chapter 7, questions for review. Why are parents not to wait until their child develops a comprehensive knowledge of biblical virtues before requiring right behavior? Anybody want to take a stab at that? Yeah.
I said because the natural inclination of the child from age 3 and under is they're all about themselves and themselves alone
Yes.
instead of others.
Yep.
Excellent. Excellent. Yeah, I hate to use the word we're born selfish, because selfish, we tend to think of it as sinful, right? But you think about yourself and your own needs as part of the survival instinct that God gave you as a little kid, right? And so you're going to train them out of that. So yes, behavior is going to precede beliefs there. Any other thoughts?
You'd be waiting for a long time.
Yes.
Morally motivated.
Right.
Yeah, excellent.
Yeah. Do you want me to share this? Yeah. I think of John... Oh, can I share?
No, go ahead.
I think
Yep.
of John 8:31 and 32. Jesus said, "If you hold to my teaching, you are really my disciples. Then you'll know the truth, and the truth will set you free." There's a lot of things that we will obey first and never really understand until we're obeying. For children, when they're young, they are not going to understand anything, but you're still going to require the right behavior. So that's why they said actions precede beliefs. But as they get older, and especially those of you with young kids that are training now, here's the thing that you need to watch out for, is because you've trained the right behavior and because they're in a habit of it, now you have to find out as they get older and older, do they know why?
Right.
And are they doing it, is it becoming a belief? It's never good enough that they do the right thing and don't know why, because they won't be able to take that into adulthood and let it govern behavior outside of the situation you've trained. So
Yeah, you've got to just love the scriptures, right? That God doesn't necessarily put everything in a particular order, but He covers it all. Just think about this verse for a second. Jesus says to His disciples, "If you hold to my teaching, you're really my disciples. Then you'll know the truth, and then the truth will set you free."
yeah.
I correlate this to math. When I was in school doing upper level math, there were many times where I would write down the equation the teacher gave me, having absolutely no idea why that worked, because they went at a pace that my little pea brain didn't follow. But I would go home and I would run those equations over and over and over again, and over time, all of a sudden, I see why this equation works, right? This is what reminds me of the scripture, that there are things that the Bible says, trust me, I created you, I'm your heavenly Father, obey me, and in time, this will begin to make sense to you, especially when it comes to societal things versus biblical things. Sometimes what is biblical seems not to make sense. Wait until we talk about modesty, right?
Purity.
Sometimes things that are biblical seem to make no sense to us because we've been raised by society. God says, you can learn the way of the prodigal son, or you can trust me. And if you trust me, I will not leave you in the dark.
Yep.
Right? But it may take you a little while for the synapses to close and for you to go, I get it. Yeah.
Yep.
Go ahead.
Why can't temperamental weaknesses be used as a legitimate excuse for character weaknesses like disrespect? Anybody want to share on that?
Any thoughts? Why can't temperamental weaknesses be used as a legitimate excuse? Yeah.
I said no matter a child's temperament, they're still subject to God's moral law of respect for others.
Yep.
Excellent. I saw another hand. Anybody else want to add? Okay.
Yeah, obviously we've already shared a story about Alex being shy. There's going to be temperamental weaknesses, and that just means it's going to take a little longer, and you're going to have to be patient, and you're going to have to do a lot of teaching of why and a lot of practicing. Okay, but the standard should not change depending on your kid's strengths, okay? And it's really easy to do that because it's just easy. Like, oh, this kid likes to do that? Okay, you do all the chores. Actually, Alex likes to clean. And so my first go-to when I need something done, as I say, I'll find myself first asking Alex because she won't complain. And then I have another one. And we're working on that still. So I have to be careful.
I thought I was doing fine.
Yeah, but I have to be careful not to suddenly dump it on Alex because it's easier for me.
Can I just add this? That I know this question is about temperamental weaknesses. Just keep in mind, God doesn't give you a temperament that has to have sin, right?
Yeah.
But temperaments will have associated weaknesses, and we've talked about this, so I won't belabor the point. But this doesn't just apply to temperaments, this applies to genders. I cannot tell you how many times we have had parents say, well, it's so nice to see, that empathy in your girls, but I've got boys. And no, where does it say in the Bible that you are excused from this virtue because you're male? Or you're excused from this virtue because you're female? Now, it may look slightly different, okay? But a young man is to be self-controlled.
Yep.
A young man is to treat others the way he would want to be treated. A young girl is, right, fill in the blank. But you got to be careful not to let society creep in. Are there differences between males and females? Absolutely. Are there differences in the way that they're going to live out the life and the things that are going to drive them? And absolutely. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about virtue, right? Go ahead.
And if you judge because you have a boy and you make all these assumptions and you're judging him, you're not going to really know him. And it's the same if you have a girl. I have, 3 girls, and they are night and day.
Yeah.
I didn't know God could make 3 females so different. And if I stereotype them, oh, they're girls. I've got one that likes to talk. I got one that doesn't like to talk, never knows what she feels. I got another one that, whatever, something different. But you get the point. If I stereotype them as they're girls, therefore they're emotional, they all feel things, they're in touch with their feelings, I would be really off in training them. So,
Number 3, as it relates to Mr. and Mrs., what is meant by the statement, time has not allowed a child to be equal? Any thoughts? Yeah.
I think going back to being raised in Nigeria, they say proverb, there's an African proverb that says, doesn't matter how rich a young man becomes, he never has as much used clothes as an adult. So meaning the experience and the exposure of somebody older never goes away. Doesn't matter.
I love that.
yeah, it's beautiful.
Say it again. What's the phrase? No matter how much what you have?
How much wealth a young man has, he never has
As much used clothes.
used clothes, like very close.
Yeah. Very cool. Yeah, that's okay. So that's the African way of saying it. The Gary Ezzo way of saying it. I like that. The Gary Ezzo way is that time has not made us equal.
Yeah.
Right? I am not better than my children. I am not more holy than my children. I have no more value than my children. But I have got a lot more experience than my children because I am a lot older than my children. Okay? So when I first went through this class some 14-something years ago, I struggled with the concept of Mr. and Mrs. And I struggled with it because in my upbringing, my parents had a group of close friends. All the men and their boys, we all backpacked every single year. And it was Jerry, Bill, Bob, Rex. I mean, I knew them all by name, and there was an intimacy, right? And so I rejected the concept when I went through this class the first time because I wanted my children to have a similar intimacy that I had with adults. And it took me a while to start to see in my children what's the word I'm looking for? Wise in their own eyes, right? Is how the Proverbs say it. To start to see that in my children before I realize, oh, they're not really understanding that time hasn't made them equal, right? And so we then had to go back and we had to teach that. Now, whether you use Mr. and Mrs., honestly, that's up to you. That's a tool. That's not a biblical mandate. And we talked early on in this class about how there's biblical mandates, which is to honor elders, right? And the wisdom of the gray-haired man. Like, that's a biblical mandate. And then there's tools. So I don't want you to get caught on Mr. and Mrs. That took me a while even to figure out in my own home. But the biblical principle is that we need to be teaching our children that there is something to be learned from age,
Yeah.
right?
And I feel like when we had decided, because we felt like they were treating our friends like peers, we decided let's add the last name in. We actually did see a change. I don't know if that'll work for you, but we felt like it did help them see that this person deserves a different level of respect. Now, we had a couple people in the church families that were aunts and uncles, but it was like 2 families, not the whole church. Yeah. And obviously, we respected you more. And if you didn't want to be called by your last name, there was people would tell us that. We would tell the kids it's the preciousness of that adult. He does not want to, she or he does not want to be called by their last name. And so we followed that. When they got into the teen ministry, we didn't ask them to call these, like Risa and Jamal are young, so they could call them Miss Risa. I still had to say Miss or Mrs. I didn't do that? What do you say? Huh? Oh, you just call her Risa. Well, okay, thank you. No, sorry. I guess we took it off completely.
Yeah.
I didn't remember that. Gosh, thanks, Alex. So anyway, they call her Risa. That's what everybody calls her. That's fine. That's a different relationship. But she still calls Mark and Connie by their last name. And Emily, when she went off to college, she asked me, she's like, this is kind of weird. Now I'm an adult, and all these people in the fellowship I've been calling by their last name. What do you think? And I was like, well, I think it's really up to you. But there's always going to be some people that will always be like a Mr. Mancini. And I think she still calls him that. So, there's no rule on it.
Okay, so we're going to move on to the next question in just 1 second. I just want to give you a scriptural reference. Job 12:12. It says, "Is not wisdom found among the aged? Does not long life bring understanding?" Okay? Now, what's missing from here? Biblical morality. It doesn't say, does not biblical morality bring about understanding? Now, that's true, but that's not what it says. What it says here is age and long life bring about wisdom and understanding. And so it was very important to us to teach our children that they have something to learn from everybody that's gone before them. Now, there might be 4 things that this older gentleman is saying to them, like, oh, you should really enjoy the parties in college. Okay, disregard, biblically inappropriate. Okay? But I should not discount this person or mock them in my mind or devalue them because one of their belief systems is askew from the Scriptures, right? And if I can believe that I want to learn what this person has to offer, right? I recently, about a year ago, was paired up with a guy, and he was about to retire. And the way my job works is we get paired up with different coworkers literally every week, if not every few days. And so this gentleman was 64 years and like 9 months. He had just three months left before retirement. And I said, what are you going to miss about this? And his answer was, he said, when I retire, I have one group of friends and it's just going to be that group. He says, what I love about coming to work is every week I get paired up with someone who has some area of expertise that I'm not familiar with, and I love learning about other people's areas of expertise. This is a 64-year-old and 9 months. And it struck me. I was like, wow, how cool is that? He's in touch with that he likes that, and he realizes that he's going to lose that in 3 months from now, right? So if we can adopt that, we can in turn teach that to our children, that everyone has something to offer. And when you believe that, here's what God's able to do. When you believe that, God is then able to show honor to that person and make them feel important. Because God thinks they're important. And He's going to use a young child who's interested in them, who doesn't just say, hi, Mr. Ritter, but says, oh, hi, Mr. Ritter, how was your week? Oh, you got to go, what is that place like? Right? Who shows an interest in me, who asks questions. I feel honored. I feel important. And how am I going to feel if I'm in a nursing home where no one comes to visit me?
That will not happen.
Right? I mean, that's what we do with age in our nation. Right? So God wants to say, yeah, seriously, Alex, that's not going to happen. Cut that out of the video. Right? God wants to use youth to show that you are still incredibly important to me, and you still have something to honor or to offer, this world, right? So just another way to teach virtue. Go ahead.
And use our fellowship. We have older people. I told the girls that before they just talk to the teens, they need to go and talk to the adults around and ask them how they're doing, because they want to run to their friends. But I want them to see the value of learning from everybody in the body, not just people their age. Okay, so one thing we want to bring up is, well, I've numbered it number 4, but it's not in the book, is it?
No, but go ahead.
Okay, so many behaviors are not addressed specifically, but they are addressed in a general context, in the scriptures. So I've heard parents say things like, well, it's not in the Bible. We have not found anything yet that we cannot find a biblical reference somehow, some way. For example,
this is, and just to be super clear, this is how I wrote this. We have not
immoral thing.
Yeah, we have not found any behavior for which we've been unable to find a biblical governing principle.
Thank you.
Okay, so the specific interaction between two humans may not be modeled for us in the Bible, but we've tried. We have yet to find any behavior for which there's not a governing principle in the scriptures. Go ahead.
So our job as parents is to find those, because we don't necessarily have all those answers, and sometimes we're wanting something, we have to stop and think. So the two key scriptures, 1 Corinthians 13:5, love is not rude. That applies to so many things. Your kids chomping, your kids tapping the table. Who are they thinking about? They're thinking about the fact that they just want to sit there and make a loud noise, and they're not thinking about, does that affect anybody else, right? So love is not rude. That applies to a million things with kids. Titus 3:2, be courteous to all men. Okay, so again, the Bible teaches these things because God's like, hey, I want this parents to apply to a lot of things you're dealing with in your life and your child's. I'm going to give you 2 examples. Why should our kids keep their room clean? There's different schools of thought. A lot of people are out there like, oh, I just let my kid do whatever he wants with his room because it fosters creativity, or they're going to become so messy. This was what my mom actually said. She said, because it was a time in parenting where it was very non-conflict. So it's like, do whatever you want with your belongings, they're yours. Do whatever you want, because you're going to get miserable enough because your room is so messy. You're going to learn from that. Do you think we learn from that? No. Orderliness is not innate except for a few people, like Dave and Alex. They're orderly. Dave's mom tells funny stories about how she'd go in and dust, and Dave would know if the car was barely moved, because every day, his cars were in the same order. And he's the same way. He comes home. Yeah, they're exactly the same. He comes home from a trip. He comes home from a trip, and immediately he goes and puts everything where it belongs. I don't. I come out, I'm like, tired. This is a good dropping spot. I'll be back tomorrow. Okay, I've had to learn from my husband to be orderly, and I wish my parents had trained me, because what happens when you're not orderly? Well, first of all, God does command it in His family. 1 Corinthians 14:40, but everything should be done in a fitting and orderly way. Now, he's referring to how we worship God, but that's God's family. So if God expects orderliness in His family, why wouldn't I expect it in my family? And so that's one aspect. And then also, you think about all the problems if you're not orderly. You lose things. You're late to things. You waste time because you're not orderly in your day. You're off having a conversation too long with a sister when it's way past the time that you shouldn't have been on the phone because you should have been making dinner or whatever, Orderliness is vital to really being productive, having a productive life.
And I just want to go back to the example of Tammy's mom that said, they're your belongings, it's your room, do what you want. Are you going to get that? Yeah, okay, good.
So anyway, back to orderliness is you want to teach that to your kids, and then you want to actually teach them how to be, especially for the children who this doesn't come natural. Don't be mad. Their minds aren't thinking like some people's minds. Alex, that just comes very natural. You go in, you open her closet, she just is naturally orderly. That's not my other 2, or me. So I've had to train myself, and I had to train my other 2 how to take the time and put things back immediately. Don't procrastinate. And we just had a rule, nothing was ever on the floor. Because if you allow that to happen, it just grows, right? You just get this mountain. And so we just say, you know what, guys, well, he taught me this. He's like, Tammy, it just takes a second to go just hang that coat up. And he's right. I would always look at it as like this big oh, this is going to take me so long. No, it takes seconds. Just go put the coat up, put my purse. He just had to train me, put the keys in the same place every day.
Okay, and
but
what is the moral reason why for orderliness? What do you think? What's the gut level moral reason why to be orderly, Andy?
Sharing a space with others.
Yes.
Excellent. The preciousness of others.
Yeah.
If I don't hang the keys where they're supposed to go, and then my daughter needs to take the car and I'm not home,
Yeah.
where are the keys? I'm not showing that I honor her or her.
Yeah.
I'm not showing the preciousness of others. Right, but it's my closet. Yeah, but it offends the other people in your house that it's a pigsty. You know, it makes
Or
them
you can't
frustrated
find
and
things.
uncomfortable, or you can't find things, and so everyone is late to the appointment because you couldn't, right? It's the preciousness of others.
The next
Okay?
thing is the virtue of stewardship. Luke 16:1-2, Jesus told his disciples, there was a rich man whose manager was accused of wasting his possessions. So he called him in and asked him, what is this I hear about you? Give an account of your management, because you cannot manage any longer. Luke, and then down a little further, Luke 16:11. So if you have not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth or things for our kids, who will trust you with true riches? So stewardship, guys, our stuff actually isn't our stuff. And we've been to some developing countries, and it's amazing how the disciples live. Their houses are spotless. They are. They are so grateful and take such care that I really realized we had way too much stuff and my kids aren't valuing it. So social media.
I just want to say this before social media, that we're not going to talk about worldview today, but this is a great example of it.
Yeah.
Tammy's mom, God bless her, believed these are your things. You use them as you want, and when you are enough of a mess, you'll get frustrated and you'll change. Well, what if she did change? Okay, the outcome may have been okay, but she missed the biblical principle that nothing that you currently possess is yours.
Yes.
It's all on loan from God.
That's right.
Everything, from the socks on your feet, it is on loan from God. And if you don't give your children the appropriate worldview, then a bunch of things are going to grow from that errant belief. Right? Entitlement, frustration, discontent, right? All these things start to grow, and you're like, why is my child out of control in all these areas? Well, you forgot to teach stewardship. Their worldview is incorrect. And with a wrong foundation, all sorts of weeds are going to pop up.
Yeah.
Okay?
I actually had a mom tell me one time the reason she let her children be very messy is she said, I don't want to make them insecure by correcting the way they choose to live. And I was like, oh, but that's not the Bible. I mean, and first of all, security shouldn't come from the fact you need to be corrected or trained. That's good and beautiful. But anyway, so we can sometimes have some weird views. If you're fighting something internally about why you don't want to ask it of your child, sometimes you got to dig deep and get advice and find out if there's some thinking that's off.
Yeah.
Social media, I just want to throw this one out there. We're going to go into depth on that later, but that's another area where we need to consider the preciousness of others. We have a lot of responsibility if we choose to give our kids a phone or let them be on the internet. One thing is we trained our kids before we ever let them have social media. We talked about why you're posting, what are you posting, what's your motivation. We talked about how it's easy to get pulled into wanting attention. We actually ban selfies. We don't do selfies. Like why would you take a bunch of pictures of yourself and post them? Now, if you're with your friends and you're celebrating something and you want to post it on Instagram, great, but really, what's the heart behind that? And, again, who are you highlighting, right? And so just be prepared to always be dealing with the heart of why you let your kids do, or don't just let your kids do anything, be prepared to deal with the heart. All of my daughters now have admitted that they will look at the likes and start to notice that they feel better about themselves if they have more likes, And if they don't get a like, they notice it affects them. And so Emily actually turned it off to where she can't see the likes. She's like, that's not healthy for me. Satan uses it. So it's good that our kids get to learn this. There's a great book called I Liked. Are you seeking the approval from man and not God? Alex, is that the book?
It's just light.
And then at the bottom it says, are you seeking the approval of God or man or something? Anyway, it's all about the impact that social media has on kids. And Alex is leading a Bible study right now with the teen girls, a group of them, on helping them see how this is affecting our self-esteem.
There's a verse in Proverbs 27:2 that says, let someone else praise you and not your own mouth.
That doesn't mean put a lot of selfies of yourself and get a bunch of praise, but
yes, but
what's
think
your
about
motive?
that. Right, what's your motive? We were fortunate enough to take our only overseas vacation to Italy one time. It's the only time we've ever had the money to do it. We went over to Italy, and because I work in the airline industry, we got first class free because seats were available. And we very quickly said to our kids, this is a huge privilege. These are like $4,000 or $5,000 a piece, and we're paying zero. Everyone else in here paid $4,000 or $5,000 a piece, so the preciousness of others. But we just said, we're not going to post any of these pictures. Because
tell our
think
friends.
about what this says, or the potential for temptation for your friends. Right? So many of your friends have never even been on an airplane or never been anywhere. And not only are you going somewhere for free, by the way, but you're about to post, this lifestyle that our family could never in our wildest dreams afford. We couldn't afford it if we wanted to splurge. We couldn't afford it. Right? So, again, it's just this concept about the preciousness of others, and then all these gems are in the Scriptures. I love that verse. Let someone else praise you, not your own mouth. Are you praising yourself by what you post? Are your children looking for affirmation through social media, or are they figuring out how to get affirmation from their family and from God? Okay?
Moving on, be careful who is influencing or training your children regarding respect for others. It's really important that you know what your children are watching. There are so many shows today, if not almost all of the current shows, that communicate disrespect for parents and all authority, and disrespect for siblings. Anything that is not your standard, if your kids don't have a moral conviction that they're sticking to, they shouldn't be watching it. Right. All you're doing is saying, you're sitting there having this great family time teaching the standard, and then you go turn on the TV and they spend the rest of the week watching everything going against you. Who do you think they're going to end up listening to? Mm-hmm. So what they watch is very important. It doesn't mean you can't ever watch a show that doesn't have your standards, because none of us would watch TV. But you can take it and learn. You can take and train into it, right? But just understand it confuses a child. We had I won't say in case any of you let your kids watch it, but there was one show where the kid was always whining and whining and whining, and Dave heard it from the other room, and he's like, turn it off. And he's like, whoa, that is not what, they will pick it up. Okay, so it's really important. It also, and so anyway, this also goes with dating. You know, what are you teaching your kids about how to court and date and fall in love? If you're letting them watch the shows, even like an innocent, we say it's innocent because they're not making out or doing something sexual, but if they're portraying a love story that is not the love story the Bible teaches, you just changed your standard in your home. Now, if they're older, that's different. You know, our daughters now have the freedom to watch other shows because they're not tempted by it. They're not attracted to it. Now, still within moderation.
Within reason. Yep.
We're pretty much the same. What I can watch, they can watch. You know, even as a married woman, I'm careful. I can't watch a lot of romance shows. I start to expect it of him that's not realistic. So, but, love you. So.
She'll clarify some other time.
You're awesome, but
I just want to put this in your mind, right? If what you allow in your house is not the message you want to convey, then you got to consider the value of it, right? Start with cartoons. The most gentle, simple, humorous cartoon. the female rabbit walks across with massive red lipstick and big hips, swaying back and forth. And what happens to the male? His eyes go and his mouth drops to the floor. What did you just teach your child? This is what attracts men to women, and this is what you need to highlight in order to receive attention on a simple little humorous cartoon.
Yeah, so
right?
Don't be deceived because there's not certain behaviors in it that it's not communicating a value.
How many romances are the two people crushingly dysfunctional? And they sort of sort it out in a humorous, fun, loving way, and at the end, everything's back together. But just stop for just a moment and think about if you had that level of dysfunction, and in 2 hours you sort of figured it out and sorted it out. What's day 5, 6, 7, month 2, 3, 4 going to be like with all of that baggage, right? But that's part 2 of the movie that never gets made. Right? And so what are we doing for our children if that is the prevailing thing in our house?
Yeah.
So if you're going to watch something that has a message that is not what you want in your house, then you should use the opportunity to teach into it.
And that means,
Okay.
unfortunately, you have to watch it with them, or
Yep.
at least know. And so we did watch TV, but we did a lot of things like VeggieTales, Christian-based, Little House on the Prairie, Sound of Music. But even Sound of Music had to teach a little bit into that, even though it wasn't sexual. The romance wasn't, sneaking out and lying to your dad. It's still in there, so I had to teach into that. So
Yep.
don't ignore what the messages are being sent to your kid. So your kids can watch TV as they got older because we had convinced them of a more beautiful way. And I think I shared in the class earlier that every time we had people come over, they'd share their love story from the church because we wanted to build up a different story in our kids' mind. They now watch things, but we still choose a lot of shows that aren't anything that they'd really be tempted with. So we kind of shy away from a lot of the romance, but we'll do things like Blue Bloods, or we don't mind murder shows. I mean, my kids aren't tempted to go kill anybody, but if there's a bunch of attractive men on it, a bunch of attractive women on it, Dave doesn't want to watch that. So just watch a movie killing people. But you get my point.
Yeah,
No.
I will say this as
If you have anger management problems, don't do that.
I will say this as we move on, but I was a little startled by how many teens I heard had watched the Super Bowl halftime.
Yes. Oh, so
And
heartbreaking.
I want to ask you a question. How many of you would take your teenage son to watch pole dancing? And if you wouldn't do that,
Yeah.
why? Watch it on television. Now, we're going to get to this, so I'm not going to leave you hanging. We will talk about this. There's a way to model how to not adulterate yourself in a way that is not condemning and judgmental, right? Because I don't want to teach that to my children. I don't want to teach my children to look at that and say, oh, those women are gross.
No.
No, they're God's daughters. They're errant in their ways. They haven't been taught, and they are not going to be won over by our judgment. The Bible says, Jesus says, I did not come to judge, but to save.
So the goal, as your child is maturing morally, and again, not based on their age, we don't want them to hang out with people that have different, extensive times. Okay, I'm not saying don't ever hang out. But if you have different belief systems, the standard is different. It gets very confusing to a child. So, if you just got to pray for a lot of wisdom, and you got to observe. So I noticed certain families that my kid would go hang out with, and they would come home and treat me poorly. And so I realized, okay, so I need to go and observe, not judge, but observe. What's the behavior in this home? I have no problem if a kid disobeys. What concerns me is, does the parent address it? Right? Our kids are going to sin. And I want to partner with other families that will help my kids, and I'll help your kids. But if I go in your home and it's okay with you for your kid to be rude and unkind, and you say nothing and you just keep giving, then I'm going to be like, okay, that's where they're at. My kid will be limited here, or I'll be with them, because that's what they will take home. And it's not judging. It's just that it's confusing to kids. And so you just want to be aware that if your kids are spending a lot of time with people with different convictions. So my kids have always played sports since they were 3, 4. Same thing. We go and we do the sport. We really never, hardly ever hung out outside that, because we did some, but it was usually always at my house. I was always driving them. They were always at my house. I could control. I knew what was going on. But as they got older, we prepared them because they loved their friends. But we're like, you guys, you believe this about dating and falling in love, and they're going to believe this. And we prepared them that was going to happen, and it happened with all their friends. And so now they go to tournaments. They give, they're kind, they serve. They go do pretty much most of the stuff by themselves, because what's going on in a hotel room with preteens and teen girls is not good. Mm-hmm. Let me tell you, Rachel travels alone with her team. And by the way, the only reason she gets to do that is because I first went with her and I observed. And when she was studying the Bible, they all turned on her. They asked her, why don't you like boys? You never talk about boys. And she's like, well, I believe God has my husband. She wasn't baptized yet.
That was the famous thing to turn everybody against her. That was the one phrase. Yep.
Yes, she went from being very popular and liked to suddenly they did not like her anymore and made fun of her. And it was heartbreaking, a lot of crying. At first I wanted to be mad at the kids, and then I realized, no, this is good. Let's see how she responds. She just got closer to God. Amen.
Yeah.
But had she not, then we might have had to pull her out of the sport. Because the sport is never more important than my kid's ability to handle it.
But here's the beauty of that, is that we got to teach the virtue of godliness.
Yeah.
Right? And if you've taken time with that virtue, you know that when you add godliness to goodness, knowledge, right? When you add godliness, at that point there begins to become a separation from the world. And the world notices you and the world rejects you.
In certain circles,
in
yes.
certain circles, right? And so we got to teach into this that look what's happening, right? And who are your friends? And where do you need to invest your time? And this was all part of God's perfect plan to train our daughter. Didn't make it any easier on us.
No.
Right? But it's part of God's perfect plan. And we can either let Him chisel away or we can try to protect them from it. And then He'll chisel sometime later when we're not around to help them.
Yeah. And so because she was studying the Bible, and just so you know, I always pray for my kids before they get to that age of studying. I always pray, God, please help them see that they need you. Each kid, I don't have time to tell the stories. Wow, did something big happen in their life that caused them to see their need for God. And for Rachel, it was suddenly she was hated and made fun of, and it was just really difficult for her. So that was good, right? She saw how much she needed God. Also, I do want to throw this in here as a freebie. It's really important that you train your children to come to you to ask questions and not their peers. Because they're going to be curious and that's okay. But make a safe environment where they always come to you, and tell them that. Say, I want you to come to me, not ask your friends. And hopefully you've built enough trust that they will do that. So my girls will come to me all the time because they don't understand some of the things their friends are talking about, and they don't ever ask because they know, they trust me. They're like, it's probably not good. And so then they'll come in. One time Alex was in a tournament and at a tournament, and they found a condom and they start playing with it, and she's like, I don't know what that is. And so she leaves the room, and then she comes and finds me because I try to always go. Sometimes I can't, and she's like, I don't even want to know totally, but I know it wasn't good based on some of the comments they made. But she didn't talk to them about it. Do you see? So I just want to encourage you to build. That's a freebie in there, but and there was a girl that went off to college, and there was some. I don't know. I guess I can say it. Yeah, you've heard this. They were having sex in the other room, and the disciple didn't know what they were doing. And so instead of her calling her parents and asking, she asked her suite mate, who was not a disciple, and she got made fun of and ridiculed. This disciple called her parents crying, and they asked us, should we have taught her all this? And I was like, well, who plays the sounds of that to prepare their kid? And I said, no. I said, your kid should have called you, right? I mean, I said, no, did you ever train her to first come to you and ask questions so that she doesn't get embarrassed or put herself out there, right? So anyway, that's a good, is they're in the world, because we're not talking about, by the way, sheltering our kids. We're talking about preparing them until they can handle the world, okay?
Yeah.